Le 30 octobre 1938, CBS diffuse une pièce radiophonique, La guerre des mondes. La mise en scène comprend de faux flashs d'informations.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News.
Les Martiens envahissent l'Amérique. Au micro, Orson Welles, un jeune metteur en scène alors quasi inconnu du grand public qui adapte ce livre de H.G. Wells. Et il le fait si bien que l'émission aurait créé le chaos dans des dizaines de villages américains paniqués par l'invasion martienne.
Une émission de radio terrifie le pays.
Your attention, please.
Sauf que ce n'est pas vrai, les Martiens n'ont pas fichu la frousse à l'Amérique. Démonstration. Le soir de la diffusion de l'émission, un service chargé de savoir ce qu'écoutaient les gens à la radio a téléphoné à 5000 ménages. 98% des personnes interrogées ont déclaré écouter autre chose à la radio ou ne rien écouter du tout. Il faut dire que la fiction radiophonique de Wells était programmée au même moment qu'une émission nationale extrêmement populaire, Chase and Sanborn Hour, un mélange de comédie et de variété animé par ce célèbre ventriloque Edgar Bergen.
Well, what kind of a coat do you want? Well, any kind of a coat. I'm not going to describe it. Well, you're not, no.
Deuxième point, même CBS n'a pas diffusé La guerre des mondes sur tout le territoire. Il y a eu ce qu'on appelle un décrochage dans certaines régions pour diffuser de la musique par exemple. Résultat, une réduction du nombre d'auditeurs potentiels effrayés, et sûrement pas 1 million comme le diront plus tard des chercheurs qui ont étudié les réactions des auditeurs de La guerre des mondes.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill.
Alors oui, quelques personnes ont sincèrement cru qu'il se passait quelque chose d'anormal. On le sait parce qu'il y a eu une augmentation des coups de téléphone au standard de la radio ce soir-là. Mais cela ne signifie pas forcément que les auditeurs étaient affolés. Cela peut aussi vouloir dire qu'ils cherchaient à vérifier l'information. En ayant pris l'émission en cours, donc en ayant manqué le générique, il est possible que des auditeurs aient cru que la guerre était déclarée. Nous sommes en 1938. En Europe, les nazis et les fascistes menacent sérieusement la paix. Dans l'esprit des Américains, une guerre est donc possible. Ils sont aussi habitués au flash info relatant des catastrophes. 5 mois avant la guerre des mondes, à la radio, le 6 mai 1937, un journaliste en pleurs décrivait le crash du célèbre ballon dirigeable, un Zeppelin, le LZ-129 Hindenburg. Alors, d'où vient-elle cette histoire de soi-disant panique ? C'est une exagération de nombreux journaux papier de l'époque. Leur but ? Discréditer les actualités radiophoniques qui concurrencent leur activité selon eux. Dans leurs articles, des journalistes mettent en garde contre les dangers de la manipulation des foules par ce tout jeune média, la radio, dont les journalistes ne maîtriseraient pas l'information.
Le pays dans son ensemble continue de faire face au risque d'informations incomplètes et mal comprises sur un média qui n'a pas encore prouvé qu'il est compétent pour raconter l'actualité.
Le mythe de la panique était né. Et à l'époque, cette histoire de panique est plausible. Emboîtant le pas aux journalistes, plusieurs scientifiques ont alimenté la légende. En 1940, des universitaires de Princeton font paraître une étude psychologique pour laquelle ils ont interrogé une centaine d'auditeurs choqués par l'émission. Un panel trop réduit pour prouver quoi que ce soit. À partir de cet effectif, les chercheurs extrapolent le nombre total des personnes effrayées à 1 million. Mais ils réduisent ce chiffre dans la préface de leur étude. Là, ils parlent de milliers d'auditeurs saisis de panique. Et comme pour la rumeur, des gens colportent cette histoire. Même CBS, le média qui a diffusé La Guerre des Mondes, entretient cette histoire de panique, à coups d'émissions, de films et même de citations de l'émission de Wells lors du 75e anniversaire de la chaîne en 2003.
Wait a minute, something's happening. Humped shape is rising out of the pit. I can make out a small beam of light against a mirror. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror and it leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Lord, they're turning into flames. The whole field's caught up by the woods, the cars, the gas tanks of the automobiles spreading everywhere. It's coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill. Evidently, there's some difficulty with our field transmission.
Manipulate the public into believing in causes for war that, decades later, were admitted to be completely fictitious. The term yellow journalism was coined to describe the type of sensationalistic, scandal-driven, and often erroneous style of reporting popularized by newspapers like William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal. In one of the most egregious examples of this phenomenon, Hearst's papers widely trumpeted the sinking of the USS Maine as the work of the Spanish. Whipped into an anti-Spanish frenzy by a daily torrent of stories depicting Spanish forces' alleged torture and rape of Cubans, and pushed over the edge by the Maine incident, the public welcomed the beginning of the U.S.-Spanish War. Although it is now widely believed that the explosion on the Maine was due to a fire in one of its coal bunkers, the initial lurid reports of Spanish involvement stuck, and the nation was led into war. In many ways, the phrase infamously attributed to Hearst in reply to his illustrator, "You furnish the pictures, and I'll furnish the war," apocryphal as the story may be, nevertheless perfectly encodes the method by which the public would be led to war time and again through the decades. The U.S. was drawn into World War I by the sinking of the Lusitania, a British ocean liner carrying American passengers that was torpedoed by German U-boats off the coast of Ireland, killing over 1,000 of its passengers. What the public was not informed about at the time, of course, was that just 1 week before the incident, then First Lord of the Admiralty Winston Churchill had written to the President of the Board of Trade that it was most important to attract neutral shipping to our shores, in the hopes especially of embroiling the United States with Germany. Nor did reports of the attack announce that the ship was carrying rifle ammunition and other military supplies. Instead, reports once again emphasized that the attack was an out-of-the-blue strike by a maniacal enemy, and the public was led into war. The U.S. involvement in World War II was likewise the result of deliberate disinformation. Although the Honolulu Advertiser had even predicted the attack on Pearl Harbor days in advance, the Japanese naval codes had already been deciphered by that time, and that even Henry Stimson, the U.S. Secretary of War, had noted in his diary the week before that he had discussed in a meeting with Roosevelt how we should maneuver them, the Japanese, into the position of firing the first shot without allowing too much danger to ourselves. The public were still led to believe that the Pearl Harbor attack had been completely unforeseen. Just last month, a newly declassified memo emerged showing that FDR had been warned of an impending Japanese attack on Hawaii just 3 days before the events at Pearl Harbor. Yet the history books still portray Pearl Harbor as an example of a surprise attack. In August 1964, the public was told that the North Vietnamese had attacked a U.S. destroyer in the Gulf of Tonkin on 2 separate occasions. The attacks were portrayed as a clear example of communist aggression, and a resolution was soon passed in Congress authorizing President Johnson to begin deploying U.S. forces in Vietnam. In 2005, an internal NSA study was released concluding that the second attack, in fact, never took place. In effect, 60,000 American servicemen and as many as 3 million Vietnamese, let alone as many as 500,000 Cambodians and Laotians, lost their lives because of an incident that did not occur anywhere but in the imagination of the Johnson administration and the pages of the American media.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Lift off. All right, lift off and the clock is started. Yes, sir. Reading you loud and clear.
We only can fly in Earth orbit. That's the farthest that we can go.
We only can fly in Earth orbit. That's the farthest that we can go.
And this new system that we're building is going to allow us to go beyond and hopefully take humans into the solar system to explore. So the moon, Mars, asteroids, there's a lot of destinations that we could go to, and we're building these building block components in order to allow us to do that eventually.
Once we travel beyond low Earth orbit, the crew will be exposed to larger amounts of radiation. So we have to design both the crew protection systems and our electronic systems.
Mike Collins, but for today, how often are you reminded of your achievement?
Well, if I go out back and look up in the sky and see the moon, either I can remember where I was 20 years ago, or I can pretend I've never been there, and it works for me either way.
I'm going to assume that
either I can remember where I was 20 years ago, or I can pretend I've never been there, and it works for me either way.
Why has nobody been to the moon in such a long time?
That's not an 8-year-old's question. That's my question. I want to know, but I think I know. Because we didn't go there, and...
The experiment is not a public opinion poll. It examines behavior under the pressure of social forces, as the experiment of Solomon Asch reveals.
The experiment you'll be taking part in today involves the perception of lengths of lines. As you can see here, I have a number of cards, and on each card there are several lines. Your task is a very simple one. You're to look at the line on the left and determine which of the 3 lines on the right is equal to it in length. All right, we'll proceed in this order. You'll give your answer.
Only one of the people in the group is a real subject, the 5th person with the white T-shirt. The others are confederates of the experimenter and have been told to give wrong answers on some of the trials. The experiment begins uneventfully as subjects give their judgments.
2, 2, 2, 2,
2, 3, 3,
3, 3.
But on the 3rd trial, something happens.
2,
2, 2, 2, 2.
The subject denies the evidence of his own eyes and yields to group influence. Asch found subjects went along with the group on 37% of the critical trials. But he found through interviews that they went along with the group for different reasons.
1.
1.
They must be right. There are 4 of them and 1 of me.
1.
This subject's yielding is based on a distortion of his judgment. He genuinely believes that the group is correct.
1.
1.
1.
2.
1. 2. 2. 2.
I know they're wrong, but why should I make waves?
2.
In this case, the subject knows he is right, but goes along to avoid the discomfort of disagreeing with the group. Here, the distortion is at the level of his response.
2. 2.
2.
2.
In the previous experiment, the naive subject stood alone against the group. In this variation, Asch gave the naive subject a partner, here seated in the 3rd position, who also gives the correct response.
1. 1. 2. 1. 2.
With a partner, yielding drops to only 5% of the critical trials compared to 37% without a partner. Although subjects report warmth and good feeling toward the partner, they typically deny that he played a role in their own independence. The partnership variation shows that much of the power of the group came not merely from its numbers, but from the unanimity of its opposition. When that unanimity is punctured, the group's power is greatly reduced. Sometimes we go along with the group because what they say convinces us they are right. This is called informational conformity. But sometimes we conform because we are apprehensive that the group will disapprove if we are deviant. This is called normative conformity. The strength of the normative factor is shown in another variation carried out by Asch. In this variation, the subject is told that because he had arrived late, he would have to write his answers. Subjects in this private response experiment are exposed to the same amount of misleading information as other subjects, but they are immune from any possible criticism by the group.
1.
1.
1.
And this enormously reduces the pressure to conform. Conformity drops by 2/3. Ash's experiment is a classic. It reveals how people will deny what they see and submit to group pressure. It allows us not only to observe conformity.
Remarkably, the public at large has seemingly learned nothing at all from all of these documented historical manipulations. If anything, the media has become even bolder in its attempts to manipulate the public's perceptions, perhaps emboldened by the fact that so few in the audience seem willing to question the picture that is being painted for them on the evening news.
C'est maintenant le grand rendez-vous. En principe, dans un quart d'heure, nous devrions avoir des images. C'est maintenant que va se passer la sortie sur le sol lunaire.
Oui, le drapeau est placé maintenant. C'est un grand moment pour 200 millions d'Américains.
Il y a une chose qui me surprend justement, c'est qu'on a l'impression que le drapeau flotte un peu.
Absolument.
Or, théoriquement, il ne devrait pas y avoir de vent sur la surface lunaire, alors je me demande ce qui peut donner ces ondulations au drapeau.
Probablement les mouvements de la hampe.
Ce ne sont pas les vents solaires en tout cas.
We didn't go there, and that's the way it happened. And if it didn't happen, it's nice to know why it didn't happen, so in the future, if we want to keep doing something, we need to know why.
In 1991, the world was introduced to the emotional story of Nouria, a Kuwaiti girl who testified about the atrocities committed by Iraqi forces in Kuwait.
While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators. Took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor. It was horrifying.
What the world was never told was that the incident had in fact been the work of a public relations firm, Hill & Knowlton, and the girl had actually been the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador. The public was whipped into a frenzy of hatred for the Hussein regime, not for the documented atrocities that it had actually committed on segments of its own population with weapons supplied to them by the United States itself, but on the basis of an imaginary story told to the public via their televisions, orchestrated by a PR firm. In the lead-up to the war on Iraq, the American media infamously took the lead in framing the debate about the Iraqi government's weapons of mass destruction not as a question of whether or not they even existed, but as a question of where they had been hidden and what should be done to disarm them. The New York Times led the way with Judith Miller's now infamous reporting on the Iraqi WMD story, now known to have been based on false information from untrustworthy sources. But the rest of the media fell into line, with the NBC Nightly News asking what precise threat Iraq and its weapons of mass destruction posed to America, and Time debating whether Hussein was making a good faith effort to disarm Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. Reports about chemical weapons stashes were reported on before they were confirmed, although headlines boldly asserted their existence as indisputable fact. We now know that the stockpiles did not exist, and the administration premeditatedly lied the country into yet another war. But the most intense opposition the Bush administration ever received over this documented war crime was some polite correction on the Sunday political talk show circuit.
Well, let me just ask you this. If they did not have these weapons of mass destruction, though, granted all of that is true, why then did they pose an immediate threat to us, to this country?
You and a few other critics are the only people I've heard use the phrase immediate threat. I didn't. The president didn't. And it's become kind of folklore that that's what's happened. The president went...
You're saying that nobody in the administration said that?
I can't speak for nobody and everybody in the administration and say nobody said
that. The vice president didn't say that?
If you have any citations, I'd like to see them.
We have one here. It says, some have argued that this is you speaking, some have argued that the nuclear threat from Iraq is not imminent, that Saddam is at least 5 to 7 years away from having nuclear weapons. I would not be so certain.
And
close to imminent.
Well, I've tried to be precise and I've tried to be accurate.
No terrorist state poses a greater or more immediate threat to the security of our people and the stability of the world than the regime of Saddam Hussein in Iran.
my view of the situation was that he had, we believed, the best intelligence that we had and other countries had.
In 2008, CNN aired footage of a bombed-out Tskhinvali in South Ossetia, falsely labeling it as footage of Gori, which they said had been attacked by the Russians. This was immediately refuted by the cameraman who had actually taken the footage.
Today, when we arrived and news came that Gori was being shelled, I saw my footage. I said, that's not Gori, that's Tskhinvali. Having crawled through the length and the breadth of Tskhinvali, I don't need much to tell from which point this or that footage was recorded. I can swear in front of any tribunal. I can point to this location on the map of the town because I am the cameraman of the Rossiya channel videotaped that. It is 50 meters away from the entrance to the territory of the peacekeepers. Those guys who every move is regulated by the UN were all killed. The Georgians shot up their entire battalion.
In 2009, the BBC showed a cropped image of a rally in Iran, which they claimed was a crowd of protesters who assembled to show their opposition to the Iranian government. An uncropped version of the same photograph displayed on the LA Times website, however, revealed that the photo in fact came from a rally in support of Ahmadinejad. In August of 2011, the BBC ran footage of what they claimed was a celebration in Tripoli's Green Square. When sharp-eyed viewers noticed that the flags in the footage were in fact Indian flags, the BBC was forced to admit that they had accidentally broadcast footage from India instead of Tripoli.
Si le peuple ne m'aime pas, il ne mérite pas de vivre. Si le peuple ne m'aime pas, il ne mérite pas de vivre.
His own people. He compared them to rats.
كلاب هذول العرب كلاب اعلوا خلينا يقولوا العرب حمير حيوانات كلاب قالوا هذول حمير كلاب جربوا عليهم الكروز اطفال العراق هذول اطفال العراق هذه فيران جربوها كيف تجوع وكيف تموت من الجوع اذا نقص الحليب عن الطفل كيف يموت باي طريقه مش بنادمين مش اوادم بك مش فصيله ادم ابدا الادميين هم الامريكان والانجليز والفرنسيس والاسرائيليين ايه هذوم اللي اوادم اما العرب هذوم فيران حيوانات بهذا الشكل بالضبط هذا كيف يعاملوا فينا.
His own people. He compared them to rats.
Comme le disent de nombreux experts, comme le disent y compris des acteurs du dossier, les raisons pour lesquelles nous sommes entrés en guerre sont erronées, à savoir qu'il y avait un génocide en route. Ça a quand même été dit à la tribune de l'ONU, il y a des crimes contre l'humanité.
La communauté internationale a parlé d'une seule voix et notre message est sans ambiguïté. Ces violations des droits universels sont inacceptables et ne seront plus tolérées. Autre déclaration, celle du procureur général de la Cour pénale internationale depuis La Haye. La répression sanglante en Libye et les attaques contre la population civile perpétrées par les forces du colonel pourraient constituer des crimes contre l'humanité.
Il y a des massacres de populations civiles. Nous avons interviewé par exemple Bernard-Henri Lévy pour cet ouvrage qui a été une sorte de ministre des Affaires étrangères bis, qui a été utilisé par Sarkozy pour contourner Juppé, qui au début ne voulait pas faire la guerre, qui dit dans le livre « D'accord, il n'y a pas eu de massacre de populations civiles ». Ben, enfin, c'est le contraire de ce qui était raconté.
Malheureusement, il faudra dans les heures qui viennent des frappes ciblées sur ces colonnes de chars qui sont en train d'arriver aux portes de Benghazi et qui s'apprêtent à y faire un carnage annoncé.
Il y a une scène, par exemple, qui a fait le tour du monde, jamais en images, mais il a été dit que l'aviation de Kadhafi avait bombardé la population civile.
Et quand on fait donner des avions de chasse contre des manifestants, comme Kadhafi l'a fait à Tripoli.
Il y a même des généraux américains qui vous disent...
Mais c'est pas vrai, c'est pas vrai. Cette scène n'a pas existé.
Particularly, Nicolas Sarkozy has said that NATO will continue bombing Libya and military facilities here in Libya till the rebels take control over the whole of the country.
En Libye, l'OTAN, les États-Unis, la France ont fait alliance avec Al-Qaïda. Et ce qui est quand même paradoxal, c'est qu'on nous dit qu'on mène un combat pour la démocratie et contre le terrorisme, et en fait, on utilise des terroristes pour, évidemment, une guerre du fric, encore une fois. Il n'y a pas de guerre humanitaire, ça n'existe pas.
We are dropping bombs on crowded cities at night where old people and children are sleeping. And we're watching it on CNN.
To put out the blazes from what's been described as a pre-dawn airstrike by NATO warplanes here in the town of Zliten. This has been the target of near daily strikes by NATO warplanes. NATO says that it's been trying to hit tanks, armored vehicles, anti-aircraft missile sites, command and control centers. Libyan government officials who brought us here, they say that this is a storage place for food, subsidized food that they distribute, food like rice.
People here now call NATO the crazy one, which lost its sanity. It is waging a wide-scale war on the people. They are destroying everything.
Le 21 décembre 1988, un Boeing de la Pan Am explose au-dessus de la ville écossaise de Lockerbie. 270 personnes décèdent dans cet attentat. Sur place, les enquêteurs affirment avoir retrouvé les restes d'un détonateur fabriqué par la société suisse Mebo, principal client de cette entreprise, la Libye. Le témoignage du patron de la Mebo, ici à l'image, finit de convaincre les juges lors du procès de l'attentat en 2001. Seulement voilà, un de ses employés affirme maintenant avoir lui-même fourni le détonateur aux enquêteurs à leur demande.
Also that month, CNN reported on a story from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, claiming that 8 infants in incubators had died in a hospital in Hama, where Syrian authorities cut off power in the area. Some news sites even carried pictures of the infants. The images were later admitted to have been taken in Egypt, and no evidence has ever emerged to back up the accusations. As breathtaking as all of these lies, manipulations, and so-called mistakes are, they in and of themselves don't represent the only functions of the media for the war machine. Now, the US government is taking the lead in becoming more and more directly involved with the shaping of the media message on war propaganda, and the general public is becoming even more ensnared in a false picture of the world, painted with the Pentagon's own paintbrush. In 2005, the Bush White House admitted to producing videos that were designed to look like news reports from legitimate independent journalists, and then feeding those reports to media outlets as prepackaged material ready to air on the evening news. When the Government Accountability Office ruled that these fake news reports in fact constituted illegal covert propaganda, the White House simply issued a memo declaring the practice to be legal. In April 2008, the New York Times revealed a secret U.S. Department of Defense program that was launched in 2002 and involved using retired military officers to implant Pentagon talking points in the media. The officers were presented as independent analysts on talk shows and news programs, although they had been specially briefed before their appearances by the Pentagon. In December of 2011, the DoD's own Inspector General released a report concluding that the program was in perfect compliance with government policies and regulations. Earlier this year, it was revealed that the U.S. government had contracted with H.B. Gary Federal to develop software that created fake social media accounts in order to steer public opinion and promote propaganda on popular websites. The federal contract for the software sourced back to the MacDill Air Force Base in Florida. As the vehicle through which information from the outside world is captured, sorted, edited, and transmitted into our homes, the mass media has the huge responsibility of shaping and informing our understanding of events to which we don't have first-hand access. This is an awesome responsibility in even the most ideal conditions, with diligent reporters guided by trustworthy editors doing their level best to report the most important news in the most straightforward way. But in a media landscape where a handful of companies own virtually all of the print, radio, and television media in each nation, the only recourse the public has is to turn away from the mainstream media altogether. And that is precisely what is happening.
Les fake news, les rumeurs. Comparer, varier les sources. Regardez ce que les autres médias disent sur un sujet. Si aucun journal, aucune chaîne de télé, aucune radio n'a parlé d'une info, eh bien c'est probablement qu'elle est fausse.
Tu connais l'échelle de Brugger?
C'est quoi ça encore?
Tu vas répondre à 5 affirmations par d'accord ou pas d'accord. Beaucoup de choses très importantes se produisent dans le monde dont le grand public n'est pas informé.
Ça dépend. Oui, il y a plein de gens qui sont mal informés. Mais ça veut pas dire qu'on leur cache exprès.
D'accord ou pas d'accord?
D'accord, mais c'est une question à la con, ça.
Les politiciens ne nous disent généralement pas ce qui motive réellement leurs décisions.
Pareil, question à la con. Il y a plusieurs choses qui motivent une décision, c'est pas blanc ou noir.
Alors?
Pas d'accord.
Les agences gouvernementales surveillent étroitement les citoyens.
Pas d'accord.
Des événements qui, en apparence, ne semblent pas avoir de lien, sont souvent le résultat d'activités secrètes.
Pas d'accord.
Et enfin, il existe des organisations secrètes qui influencent considérablement les décisions politiques.
Encore moins d'accord.
En gros, ça permet de mesurer la force de pénétration du complotisme. Toi, tu restes ultra minoritaire, mais 58% des gens sont d'accord avec 4 ou 5 des questions que je t'ai posées. C'est ça l'échelle de Bruder. La croyance générale dans la dissimulation de la vérité.
Salut à tous, écoutons ce que déclarait Olivier Véran le 9 mars 2020 sur BFM TV.
Mais en réalité, vous savez, ce qui fait que la grippe s'arrête au printemps, c'est pas la chaleur, c'est qu'en fait, au printemps, qu'est-ce qui se passe? On ouvre les fenêtres, on ouvre les portes, on n'est plus confiné dans des lieux, on va dehors. Et donc, c'est le confinement qui provoque la circulation du virus.
Ah ouais? Tu peux répéter là?
C'est le confinement qui provoque la circulation du virus.
Ok, je vais partager cette vidéo avec vous et faire en sorte que ce soit vraiment court. Mais d'abord, je vous demande de partager celle-ci avec tous ceux que vous connaissez, et la raison pour laquelle je vous le demande est la suivante. Vous allez entendre dire que le taux de mortalité du CV-19 est de 0,1% à 0,3%, ce qui est exactement le même taux de mortalité que la grippe saisonnière normale. Et si c'est le cas, ce qu'ils admettent ici est qu'ils ont fermé toute l'économie mondiale sur un mensonge. Quelqu'un, beaucoup de personnes en fait, doivent être tenues responsables. J'ai ajouté le texte pour mieux comprendre ce que dit John Roberts et d'autres personnes dans cette salle de presse. Et au fait, nous sommes dans la salle de presse, dans la salle de briefing de la Task Force Covid-19 de la Maison-Blanche. Ce n'est pas une scène du Saturday Night Live. Ces types sont en train de parler sans savoir qu'un micro enregistre. Tu peux enlever ton masque, Doug. Le taux de mortalité est entre 0,1 et 0,3% selon une étude de l'USC. Vraiment? Ben, c'est rassurant. Tout le monde ici a été vacciné de toute façon. L'USC de la santé publique du comté de LA a sorti une étude qui a dénombré 7000 cas en Californie. Mais ils croient vraiment que le nombre de gens infectés se situe n'importe où entre 221 000 et 442 000. Vraiment? Donc ça donne un ratio de 0,1 à 0,3%. Ouais. Cette étude est récente? Ouais, elle vient juste de sortir. Donc elle suggère que ce genre de ratio de cas de mortalité est l'équivalent de celui de la grippe. Exactement. Vous avez entendu? C'est l'équivalent de celui de la grippe. Ben oui, c'est exactement ça. Et c'est exactement ce que nous nous efforçons à dire depuis le début. Jamais aucune économie n'a été fermée à cause de la grippe saisonnière. Pourquoi le ferait-on pour le Covid-19? Nous vous avons prouvé à maintes reprises par des infos issues de leurs propres documents et discours hypocrites que le Covid-19 est très loin d'être aussi mortel qu'ils le disent. Donc c'était un hoax? Non, je ne pense pas que c'était un hoax. Une conclusion logique pour un individu modérément intelligent, rationnel et sain. Donc ce que vous me dites, que l'OMS a d'abord annoncé un taux de mortalité de 3,4%, puis Anthony Fauci est arrivé et l'a ramené à 1% en disant que c'était 10 fois plus que la grippe. Et là maintenant, ok, d'accord, en fait, c'est réellement entre 0,1 et 0,3%, identique à la grippe saisonnière. Un individu rationnel et sain arriverait à cette conclusion. Oh, donc la narration officielle est un hoax. Ce type a raison d'en arriver à cette conclusion. C'est la plus naturelle. Repassons-le. Donc c'était un hoax? Non, je ne pense pas que c'était un hoax. On a juste bloqué l'économie. Détruit des vies. On harasse la classe moyenne. Les banquiers s'éclatent sur le marché des pensions. C'était un hoax. Ces gens sont malades et ils sont tous dans l'affaire. Ne les laissez pas s'en sortir. Ces journalogues des fake medias mainstream sont de mèche avec les officiels du gouvernement et nous égarent, nous les Américains et tout le reste du monde.
Comparer, varier les sources, regarder ce que les autres médias disent sur un sujet. Si aucun journal, aucune chaîne de télé, aucune radio n'a parlé d'une info, eh bien c'est probablement qu'elle est fausse.
To answer that question, we set up a hidden camera experiment to see if this woman would stand up at the sound of this tone, simply because everyone else is. You might be thinking you'd never go along with this. Or would you? After just 3 beeps, and without knowing why she's doing it, this woman is now conforming perfectly to the group. But what happens if we take the group away?
Elaine, please.
Okay, now she's alone. The crowd is gone and nobody is watching her, except our hidden cameras. What do you think she'll do? She's now conforming to the rules of the group without them even being there. Now, watch what happens when we introduce another outsider who doesn't know the rules.
Have a seat and they'll be out in just a couple minutes. Thanks so much.
Everybody was doing it, so I thought I was supposed to.
Think she'll teach the new guy what to do? We kept the cameras rolling as more unsuspecting patients arrived. And slowly but surely, what began as a random rule for this woman has now become the social norm for everyone in this waiting room. Here to explain what's going on in their brains is Jonah Berger of the University of Pennsylvania.
This sort of internalized form of herd behavior is part of what we call social learning. Starting at a very early age, when we see members of our group perform a task, our brains literally reward us for following in their footsteps.
When I saw everybody stand up, I felt like I needed to join them. Otherwise, I'm like excluded. Once I decided to go with it, then I felt much more comfortable.
Conformity is how we become socialized, but it can also cause us to develop bad habits or repeat past wrongs.
And it's why even this rebel, who wasn't standing for any of this nonsense, eventually joined the ranks. And the only thing more shocking than seeing how easily conformity affects the way you act is that similar forces are subconsciously shaping the way you think